I was just a silent assistant in a room full of billionaires until a single slap shattered the night and pulled me into an organized scheme that would force me to destroy my own life to survive. I walked into that gala invisible, but I left holding the digital key that brought down an empire built on forbidden secrets and dangerous lies. The ballroom was a sea of shimmering sequins, liquid silk, and the kind of wealth that doesn't just buy comfort, but buys reality. I stood in the corner, nursing a lukewarm glass of champagne, feeling like a misplaced piece in a high-stakes chess match. I was there as an assistant, a glorified bag carrier for my boss, a man whose ego was large enough to require its own zip code. Julian Thorne didn't just walk into a room. He occupied it, like a king surveying peasants, even when those peasants were wearing diamonds worth more than my entire life's salary. Julian was riding a high that night. His latest acquisition had just closed, and he was the darling of the financial press. He was arrogant, untouchable, and in his own mind, absolutely flawless. He moved through the crowd with a glass of whiskey in one hand and a sneer perpetually plastered to his face. I followed 3 paces behind, invisible as a ghost, which was exactly how I liked it. I had been his assistant for 3 years, and I had learned that the secret to survival was to be silent, efficient, and utterly unremarkable. The gala was for a charity I didn't care about, filled with people I didn't respect, but it was my job to make sure Julian didn't embarrass himself, or more accurately, to make sure his embarrassment didn't become my problem. We were standing near the terrace when he spotted her. She was standing by the velvet curtains looking out at the city skyline. She wore a simple, elegant gown. No flash, no designer logo, just pure, understated class. She didn't look like the other vultures circling the room. She looked like someone who had never needed to impress anyone in her life. Julian had consumed 4 scotches by then, and his usual thin veneer of civility was peeling away. He stumbled slightly as he made his way toward her, his eyes glazed with the arrogance of a man who believed the world was a buffet laid out for his personal consumption. I tried to steer him toward the bar, suggesting another drink, but he shoved me aside with a sharp, dismissive movement. "Stay put," he hissed, his voice slurred just enough to be noticeable. I watched, rooted to the spot, as he approached the woman. She hadn't turned around yet, still captivated by the lights of the city. Julian didn't say anything. He didn't introduce himself. He just walked up and placed a hand on her shoulder, the kind of patronizing, possessive touch that made my skin crawl. When she finally turned, her expression wasn't one of shock or fear, but of profound, icy indifference. She looked at Julian as if he were a bug on a windshield. Julian, clearly offended that his presence hadn't been met with immediate adoration, let out a loud, mocking laugh. "You're a bit stuck up for someone at a charity gala, aren't you?" he sneered, leaning in far too close. "Do you even know who I am?" The woman didn't blink. "I have a very good idea of who you are, Julian," she replied, her voice low and steady. It was the first time she had spoken, and the clarity of her tone cut through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a knife. "Then you should know better than to look at me like that," Julian spat, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. It happened in a heartbeat. Perhaps it was the alcohol, or perhaps it was just the sheer, unadulterated hubris of a man who had never been told no in his life. Julian raised his hand and slapped her across the face. It wasn't a playful gesture. It was a violent, open-handed strike that echoed in the brief lull of music. The sound seemed to suck the air out of the room. People stopped talking. The orchestra faltered. The woman's head snapped to the side, her hair falling over her face. She stayed in that position for a long, agonizing second. When she straightened up, the coldness in her eyes had been replaced by something far more dangerous. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply reached into her small clutch, pulled out a phone, and tapped the screen once. "You have no idea what you've just done," she whispered, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with a terrifying, controlled fury. Julian let out a drunken laugh, oblivious to the sudden shift in the room's energy. "Oh, cry me a river, sweetheart. I own half the city. I'll have you removed by the end of the hour." He turned to look at the crowd, expecting support, expecting sycophants to agree with him, but the room had gone deathly silent. Everyone was staring, not at Julian, but at the door. I followed their gaze, and my stomach dropped. 3 men in dark, sharp suits were walking into the ballroom, moving with a synchronized, tactical precision that had absolutely nothing to do with a charity event. They weren't security staff. They didn't look at the crowd. Their eyes were fixed solely on us. The woman tucked her phone away and stepped toward Julian, her voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "You wanted to ruin someone's night? Congratulations, Julian. You've just successfully ruined your entire existence." She turned and walked away, and the 3 men in suits closed in, flanking Julian on every side. One of them pulled a document from his jacket and held it up, but it wasn't a check or an invitation. Julian's face went pale, the bravado draining out of him as he read the words written on the paper. "Julian Thorne," the lead man said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for a massive organized scheme, suspected involvement with forbidden transactions, and a serious attempt to dismantle public security. You're coming with us." I stood there paralyzed as they moved to grab him. Julian struggled, his face contorted in disbelief, but he was no match for them. As they dragged him past me, he looked at me, eyes wide with panic, and shouted, "Call my lawyers! Get them here now!" I didn't move. I didn't call anyone. I just watched as they hauled him toward the exit. Then the woman who had been slapped stopped at the entrance, looked back one last time, and locked eyes with me. She didn't say a word, but her expression held a warning that sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just about the slap, and this wasn't just the end of Julian Thorne. It was the beginning of something much, much worse. And as the heavy ballroom doors slammed shut behind them, I realized with sinking dread that I was the only person left who knew exactly how everything had started. The silence that followed the slamming of the doors was absolute. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the pressure before a massive storm. The elite crowd, usually buzzing with the frantic energy of networking and vanity, stood frozen. They were like wax figures, terrified that if they moved, the same invisible hand that had snatched Julian away might reach out for them too. I remained in the corner, my back pressed against the cold marble of a pillar, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked down at my phone. It was vibrating. A text message from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "Don't leave yet." My hands shook as I shoved the device into my pocket. My brain was racing, trying to connect the dots. Julian was a billionaire, a man who played golf with senators and bought politicians like groceries. You didn't just arrest a man like that in the middle of a black-tie gala. It took months of planning, mountains of evidence, and a level of authority that made the city's local precinct look like a neighborhood watch. Yet here we were. A waiter passed by, his tray still trembling from the commotion. I grabbed a glass of water, my throat feeling as dry as desert sand. Across the room, I saw the faces of the city's upper crust starting to shift. They were whispering, their eyes darting to their own phones, panic slowly replacing the shock. They knew. Some of them at least knew exactly what kind of organized scheme Julian had been running. They were worried about who else was on the list. I knew Julian was a ruthless businessman, but the words used by the men in suits, attempt to break public security, that was something else entirely. That wasn't just white-collar crime. That was a direct charge, a heavy accusation meant to ensure the accused never saw the light of day. I started to wonder if I had been working for a man who was far more dangerous than I ever dared to imagine. I realized then that I wasn't just an assistant. I was a witness. I was the one who saw the slap. I was the one who heard his pathetic, arrogant threats. If the authorities were hunting for evidence of his character, I was a goldmine of incriminating information. Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom flickered and died. A collective gasp echoed through the room, followed by the screech of a microphone being poorly handled. A voice boomed over the speakers, cold and synthetic. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain where you are. A routine internal security check is being conducted. Nobody leaves the premises until the list is verified." Panic erupted. The doors were being guarded, not by the hotel staff, but by the same men who had taken Julian. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. I needed to move to find a way out, but every instinct told me that running would only confirm my guilt. I was still standing by the pillar when a shadow detached itself from the wall near the terrace. It was her, the woman who had been slapped. She wasn't looking at me, but she started walking in my direction. My knees felt weak. She stopped 5 feet away, her presence commanding enough to part the crowd like the Red Sea. Up close, her face was perfectly composed, though there was a slight, jagged red mark blooming along her cheekbone where Julian had struck her. It was the only sign that she was human. "You're Julian's assistant, aren't you?" she asked. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was matter-of-fact, almost clinical. I managed a tight, terrified nod. Yes, I'm sorry about him. I didn't know." "You didn't know about the secret ledgers in the floor safe at his penthouse?" she interrupted, her eyes piercing mine. "Or the encrypted drives he kept in your desk drawer, thinking you were too dull-witted to notice them?" My blood went cold. "I never touched those. I didn't even know what they were." She stepped closer, her perfume, something sharp, like ozone and winter air, filling my senses. "Whether you touched them or not is irrelevant. You are the only person who can unlock the gate to his digital kingdom. Right now there are people, powerful, desperate people, who are willing to burn this entire building to the ground to ensure those drives never see the light of day." I looked around the room. I saw faces I recognized from the morning news, people who looked far too composed for a routine security check. They weren't just guests, they were guards, and they were starting to look our way. "I need to leave," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. "If you walk out that door, you're dead before you hit the valet stand," she replied, reaching into her clutch again. This time she didn't pull out a phone. She pulled out a small, heavy silver key and pressed it into my palm. Her grip was iron tight. Julian didn't just slap a woman tonight. He slapped the person who has been tracking his illegal supply routes for 3 years. And you, my friend, are the only link to the final piece of the puzzle. She leaned in, her lips inches from my ear. "If you want to live to see tomorrow, you need to go to the basement now. Take the service elevator to the sub-level 3. There's a blue sedan parked in spot 42. Don't look back. Don't talk to anyone. And for heaven's sake, don't trust anyone who offers you help." Before I could answer, a loud crash echoed from the front entrance. Glass shattered. I turned to look and saw the main doors swinging open. A group of men in heavy tactical gear, wearing masks and carrying illegal weapons, stormed into the lobby. They weren't from the internal security check. They were the cleanup crew. "Go!" she hissed, shoving me toward the kitchen corridor. I sprinted, my heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. I turned the corner just as a burst of gunfire erupted behind me. I didn't look back, but the sound of screams and the chaotic shouting told me that the ballroom had just turned into a slaughterhouse. I reached the service door, slammed it open, and dove into the dark, labyrinthine hallways of the hotel's underbelly. I ran until my lungs burned, my heart hammering in a frantic, uneven rhythm. I found the service elevator and punched the button for sub-level 3. As the doors began to slide shut, I caught a glimpse of the hallway I had just exited. A figure was standing there. A man in a suit, his face obscured by the flickering emergency lights. He was holding a phone to his ear, and as he looked toward the elevator, he smiled. It was a cold, predatory expression. He wasn't chasing me. He was waiting for me to arrive at the parking garage, knowing exactly what I would find there. I looked down at the key in my hand, and the heavy metal started to feel like a death sentence. The elevator jolted, began its descent, and I realized with absolute terrifying certainty that I was being led into a trap, and there was absolutely nowhere else for me to run. The elevator hummed with an agonizing mechanical vibration as it descended into the bowels of the hotel. Each floor indicator light was a countdown to a confrontation I wasn't prepared for. My pulse was a rhythmic thud against my temples, drowning out the ambient noise of the building. I clutched the silver key so hard it left a deep, jagged impression in my skin, a physical reminder that I was now carrying the weight of a billionaire's downfall. The doors shuddered open at sub-level 3. The air down here was thick, smelling of exhaust fumes, stale oil, and the metallic tang of damp concrete. It was silent, a hollow, oppressive silence that felt staged. I stepped out, my legs trembling, and scanned the rows of parked cars. This was a private, restricted level, usually reserved for the high-rolling guests who needed their vehicles kept far away from the prying eyes of the valet. Row 42 was located at the very back of the garage, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of a flickering overhead bulb. There it was, a dark blue sedan, sleek and unassuming, looking like a ghost in the shadows. I moved toward it, my steps echoing too loudly on the floor. I scanned the darkness for any sign of movement, expecting a silhouette to emerge from behind a pillar at any moment. I reached the driver's side door. The key fit the lock with a smooth, expensive precision. As I turned it, the locks clicked with a sound that felt like a gunshot in the vacuum of the parking lot. I pulled the handle and slid inside, my heart racing. The interior smelled of expensive leather and something faintly chemical. The scent of forbidden substances that Julian had likely been moving through this very vehicle. I sat there for a second, trying to steady my breathing. I looked into the rearview mirror. Nothing but the endless dark concrete aisle behind me. I reached into the glove compartment, thinking there might be a map or instructions, but it was empty, save for a single black flash drive and a handwritten note. The truth is in the drive. Don't go to the police, go to the coordinates. Underneath the note were GPS coordinates scribbled in thick black ink. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped the drive. I looked back at the elevator bank. Had they followed me? Was the man in the lobby just waiting for me to lead him to the goods? I didn't have time to process the fear. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine purred to life, a low, powerful sound that vibrated through the chassis. I put the car in reverse, backing out with more speed than I intended. The tires squealed against the slick concrete, the sound echoing like a siren. Just as I shifted into drive, a set of high-beam headlights flared to life directly in front of me, pinning me against the wall of the garage. I squinted, shielding my eyes, unable to see who was behind the wheel. A massive black SUV was blocking the exit ramp. My throat tightened. There was no way out. The SUV lurched forward, forcing me to stop dead. I grabbed the door handle, contemplating a sprint toward the service stairwell, but the sedan's doors automatically locked with a heavy, final thud. The technology in this car wasn't mine to control anymore. The SUV's driver door opened. A man stepped out, tall, wearing a long trench coat that seemed to swallow his form. He didn't carry a weapon. He carried a leather briefcase. He walked slowly, methodically, toward my driver's side window. I was trapped. I reached for the flash drive, my fingers hovering over the slot in the dashboard, wondering if I should just destroy it. He leaned down, his face obscured by the brim of his hat, and tapped his knuckles against my glass. "You have something that belongs to a very dangerous group, miss." His voice was gravelly, smooth, and utterly devoid of mercy. "And you have two choices. You can hand it over, and we walk away, or you can try to leave this garage and see exactly how far you get before the brakes fail on that sedan." He wasn't just threatening me, he was detailing my death. My eyes darted to the dashboard. The GPS was already active, pulsing with a blue light, indicating the coordinates were locked. I looked at the man, then back at the dashboard. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, my voice cracking. "The drive, miss," he repeated, his smile not reaching his cold, dead eyes. "Give it to me, or the next person you see won't be talking to you at all." I glanced at the side mirror and saw a flicker of movement. Someone else, running from the stairwell. It was the woman from the Gala. She had a small concealed firearm in her hand, her eyes focused entirely on the man by my window. "Don't move," she shouted, her voice echoing through the concrete chamber. The man by my window didn't even flinch. He just sighed, a sound of profound disappointment, and reached into his coat. He didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a remote control with a single red button. "You should have left the drive, darling," he whispered to me, just as he pressed the button. The ground beneath the sedan groaned. The concrete floor, designed to be a high-security bunker, began to shift. The hydraulic lifts beneath the parking spots began to retract, pulling the floor into the earth. I was sinking. As the car plummeted into a dark, hidden void beneath the parking level, the lights of the garage vanished, replaced by the suffocating darkness of a subterranean chamber I didn't even know existed. I heard a muffled explosion from above, a clear sign that the exit had just been sealed behind me. I hit the bottom with a jarring, teeth-rattling thud. The engine died. Silence returned, colder and deeper than before. I sat in the darkness, the red light of the GPS blinking rhythmically, casting a crimson hue over the interior. And then, from the absolute blackness in front of the car, I heard the slow, deliberate sound of rhythmic clapping. "Impressive," a voice purred from the shadows. "I didn't think Julian would ever be stupid enough to trust his secrets to a nobody like you. Welcome to the end of the line." A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, blinding me, and a heavy metallic door slid open directly in front of the car, revealing a room filled with armed men waiting for my arrival. I was no longer an assistant. I was a prisoner, and the game had just shifted into a realm where survival was no longer on the table. The blinding light sliced through the windshield like a surgical blade, forcing me to throw my hands over my eyes. I was disoriented, my heart slamming against my ribs in a frantic, uneven rhythm. I could hear the heavy thrum of industrial ventilation, a low, ominous hum that vibrated through the floorboards of the sedan. The air here was frigid, tasting of ozone and wet iron. As my vision adjusted to the harsh glare, I realized the room was a subterranean vault, its walls lined with racks of blinking server towers and surveillance monitors, displaying every square inch of the Gala I had just fled. I sat frozen, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. The man who had spoken, his voice smooth and devoid of any human warmth, stepped into the light. He wasn't the man in the trench coat from the garage. This one was younger, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than my parents' house. He held a small, sleek device, a remote override, and he was looking at me not with anger, but with the detached interest of a scientist studying a lab rat in a maze. "You're early," he said, checking his watch with an air of mild annoyance. Julian always did like his assistants to be punctual, even if he never paid them enough to justify the level of danger he was dragging them into. He gestured to the two men behind him, both of whom were carrying tactical gear, and tucked into their holsters, the kind of heavy hardware that made my skin crawl. These were not police. They were the muscle of the organized scheme Julian had been running. They moved with the silent, predatory grace of men who had spent their entire lives in the shadows, far away from the light of day. "Step out of the car," the man commanded, his voice barely rising above a whisper. "And please, for your sake, keep your hands where I can see them. I'd hate for this to end messily before we even start the negotiation." I didn't move. My eyes darted to the dashboard. The GPS screen was still glowing with that ominous blue pulse, but the map had changed. It was no longer showing local streets. It was showing a schematic of the hotel's foundation, with a pulsing red dot centered exactly where we were standing. I realized with a jolt of pure terror that this wasn't just a hideout. It was the nerve center for a global, illegal operation, and I was now at the heart of it. "I don't have what you're looking for," I lied, my voice steadying despite the tremors in my legs. "Julian used me. I'm just an assistant. I don't even know what's on that drive." The man tilted his head, a thin, cruel smile spreading across his face. "Oh, we know exactly what's on it. It's the ledger of every transaction, every offshore account, and every name of the people who have been protecting Julian's little enterprise for the last decade, including, I might add, some of the very people currently securing the Gala above." He walked closer, the heels of his polished shoes clicking sharply on the concrete. He stopped inches from the driver's side door. "You think you were an innocent bystander, don't you? You think you were just the girl at the desk, taking phone calls and scheduling meetings? But you were the gatekeeper. You were the one who signed for the deliveries, who moved the encrypted packets, who looked the other way while your boss dismantled public security one brick at a time. The law doesn't care if you were naive. To them, you're an accomplice." My breath hitched. He was right. Every time I signed for those heavy, unmarked shipments, every time I processed those anonymous wire transfers, I had been building a noose for my own neck. Julian hadn't just been a billionaire. He had been an architect of chaos, and he had been using me to hold the blueprints. "Give me the drive," he repeated, his hand reaching out for the door handle. I looked at the center console. My fingers brushed the flash drive. I had a split second to make a choice. I could hand it over and pray they let me walk away, though I knew deep down that witnesses to this level of operation never really walked away, or I could do something drastic. I looked at the woman's note again. The truth is in the drive. If the truth was on the drive, then the drive was the only leverage I had. But the man was getting impatient. His eyes narrowed, and he pulled a small silver object from his pocket. Not a weapon, but a high-frequency jammer. The lights in the vault flickered, and the hum of the servers spiked, turning into a high-pitched whine that set my teeth on edge. "We don't have time for this," he snarled. "The internal security check is failing, and if we don't clear this room in the next 3 minutes, we're all going to be caught in the sweep. Give it to me." He signaled to the men behind him. They moved forward, their hands resting on their holsters, their expressions blank and deadly. I realized then that they weren't going to negotiate. They were going to take it, and they were going to erase the problem, me, in the process. I lunged for the gear shift, slamming the sedan into reverse with a scream of protest from the engine. The car bucked backward, catching the man off guard and throwing him against the concrete pillar. I didn't wait to see if he was hurt. I floored it, aiming the sedan toward the only gap in the room, a massive blast door that was slowly grinding shut. The engine roared as I accelerated, the tires spinning on the slick floor before catching grip. The men scrambled to get out of the way, one of them drawing his illegal weapon and firing a single deafening shot that shattered my side window. Glass exploded into the cabin like shrapnel, slicing my cheek and arm. I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the desperate animal need to escape. I hit the gap in the blast door just as it began to close, the metal scraping against the roof of the car with a screech that set my nerves on fire. I burst through into a dark, narrow tunnel, the headlights illuminating nothing but endless, damp concrete. I was flying through the underbelly of the city, my hands slick with blood from my cut, the drive still clutched in my right hand. I checked the rearview mirror one last time. The vault was behind me, but as I turned a sharp corner into a lower maintenance shaft, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. A red light was blinking on the sedan's dashboard. Not the GPS, but a new warning. Security breach detected. Remote access established. The man in the suit hadn't been defeated. He had taken control of the car. The steering wheel jerked violently under my hands, locking into a hard right turn against my will. I wasn't driving anymore. The sedan was accelerating on its own, steering me directly toward the dark, rushing waters of the city's storm drains. I screamed, pulling at the wheel, but it was like trying to stop a runaway train. As the car barreled toward the gaping black mouth of the drainage tunnel, I realized that Julian's security was now the one steering me toward a watery, silent end, and the drive was no longer my leverage. It was the reason they were going to bury me at the bottom of the river. The sedan surged forward, engine screaming in protest as the computerized navigation system overrode my every command. The concrete tunnel walls blurred into a streak of gray death, and the sound of rushing water grew from a low rumble to a deafening roar ahead. I saw the drop-off, the dark, swirling abyss of the primary storm drain, where the city's darkest secrets were flushed away to be buried under miles of sediment. I didn't fight the steering wheel anymore. I realized, with a clarity that only comes at the absolute edge of existence, that this car was a trap. It wasn't built to transport people. It was a mobile disposal unit. I ripped the flash drive from the port, my fingers fumbling in the dark, and lunged for the door handle. It was locked just as it had been from the start. I grabbed the heavy emergency tool from under the seat, a small steel fire extinguisher, and slammed it against the side window. Once, twice. The tempered glass finally spiderwebbed, then shattered inward, showering me with shards. The car was 20 feet from the edge. 15. 10. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself out of the moving vehicle just as it tilted over the precipice. I hit the wheat-slick concrete of the tunnel maintenance path hard, rolling until I slammed into a steel maintenance ladder. Above me, the sedan plunged into the dark water, the headlights flickering once, a dying mechanical heartbeat, before the engine sputtered out and vanished beneath the surface, The splash was followed by a silence so sudden it felt like a physical blow. I lay there, chest heaving, the damp cold of the tunnel seeping into my clothes. My arm was bleeding, my cheek was torn, and my clothes were ruined, but I was alive. And in my hand, gripped so tight my knuckles were white, was the drive. I didn't wait for the people who had been steering that car to come looking for the wreckage. I climbed the ladder, my movements fueled by a primal, desperate adrenaline. It took me 20 minutes of agonizing climbing to reach a service grate. I pushed it open and crawled out into the back alley of an industrial district, just as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed into the sky. I didn't go home. I didn't go to my bank or my family. I went to the one place that was truly untouchable, the local headquarters of the Internal Security Commission, the only agency that had been consistently investigating Julian Thorne's orbit for years. I didn't walk through the front door. I slipped through the loading dock, finding the night duty supervisor, a man I'd seen in the background of 100 forgotten legal briefs. He looked at me, a battered, shivering mess, and his eyes went wide. I didn't say a word. I simply held out the flash drive and the silver key. "Julian Thorne," I whispered, my voice sounding like gravel. "It's all here. Everything." The fallout was like an earthquake. Within 12 hours, the city was in a state of absolute, unprecedented lockdown. The organized scheme wasn't just a rumor. It was a sprawling, decade-long cancer that had reached into the highest levels of the judiciary and local government. By the following afternoon, news outlets were running wall-to-wall coverage of the raids. The internal security check I had witnessed at the Gala was revealed to be a desperate final attempt by Julian's associates to purge the digital evidence before the authorities could get their hands on it. They found the cars, the accounts, and the hidden server vaults. They found enough evidence to ensure that everyone involved, from the billionaire who slapped me to the men in the suits who tried to drive me into the river, would face the largest trial of the century. They weren't just looking at jail time. They were facing massive charges for their attempts to break public security and orchestrate widespread illegal operations. I was taken into protective custody, a state that lasted for months. I testified behind a screen, my voice changed by technology, my identity scrubbed from every record. The wrong woman I had seen slapped at the Gala. She turned out to be a high-ranking intelligence officer, the woman who had been the architect of the entire sting operation. She visited me once, just before I was released into a new life in a city where no one would ever know my name. She didn't thank me. She didn't need to. She just handed me a manila envelope. "You were just an assistant," she said, her voice softer than before. "But you turned out to be the only person with the courage to walk through the fire when it mattered. You kept your integrity when everything around you was rotting. That's more than most of the people at that gala could ever say." I walked out of the building into the sunlight of a city I didn't recognize, breathing in the air that no longer smelled of ozone or deceit. I looked down at the envelope. It was a clean slate, a new identity, a fresh start, and a significant amount of money that the commission had recovered from one of Julian's frozen accounts. I stopped at a park bench and sat down, watching the world move by. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't waiting for a text, a call, or an order. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I realized then that while Julian Thorne had tried to build an empire on the broken backs of those he deemed invisible, he had forgotten one simple truth. In a world of monsters, it's the quiet ones who hold the keys to the kingdom. I stood up, dropped the remnants of my old life into a nearby trash can, and walked toward the train station. I wasn't an assistant anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was the person who brought down a titan, and for the first time in my life, the path ahead was finally, completely mine. I didn't look back. There was nothing left in the shadows for me to see.